Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the art of communicating your science and startup. My name is Kirsten Loita, and I'm a partner at Osage University Partners, leading our university relations efforts. We have two expert guest panelists today, and I'll have each of the people joining us introduce themselves if we go to the next slide. Lori, could you lead off our introductions?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And thank you for inviting us to be on this panel. I'm very excited to talk about communications. My name is Lori Lennon. I'm the founder and CEO of Thinkubator Media, an organization dedicated to elevating the profiles of women in STEM. And we do that through communications, media outreach, and overall communication strategy. I come to this position as a former journalist. I worked in TV news here in Boston and then moved over to Northeastern University, where I was the director of communications for the College of Science. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to talking more.
Thank you, Lori. Otto?
Awesome. Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me. My name is Otto Pohl. I am also a former journalist, for many years. I've also been a co-founder 4 times, and then I was head of communications for several startups, and now I run a communications agency where I help startups tell their story better. And so I'm delighted to be here today. And with my focus particularly on science and university-backed startups and base startups, this is a perfect chat for us to have today.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori and Otto. We're really excited to have you here talking about what people in academia should be considering when communicating their scientific interests, their findings, and their entrepreneurial endeavors, especially in this media-rich world that we have today. We'll go to the next slide. Before we get to Otto and Lori's main part of what we're talking about today, just a few housekeeping items. The slides and the recording of this webinar will be available on OUP's partner portal, and a recording will also be publicly available via our YouTube channel later. This should happen within a week of our recording this webinar. The partner portal is an online portal for the tech transfer officers and researchers at our partner universities that is full of relevant tech transfer and startup content. There's some information here about how you can actually register for this and where you'll find this particular webinar, as well as the downloadable presentation deck. We've already had a lot of webinars this year, and we have a couple more coming up in June, so we're just going to mention those right here. Our first is a case studies webinar on proof of concept funds at universities, and the second is our 5th installment in our funding and equity webinar series. This time it will be focusing on the basics of cap tables, the calculations behind them, and how exits play out based on those cap tables. That one will be on June 27th. And as I mentioned with the proof of concept ones, that one will be on June 6th. One other thing I'll mention to people, because we get a lot of questions about where they can find our webinars afterwards, et cetera, is that I mentioned that it is on our YouTube channel. There is a link to it noted here. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. I think this is so funny in what we do, but we have a YouTube channel. You can go ahead and subscribe to it, and then you'll see all of our webinars as they come up. So we'll go to the next slide. A short intro on OUP for those of you who do not know us. We are a venture capital fund that partners with academic institutions to invest in their startups, typically by exercising participation rights available through their licenses. As a part of this partnership, the institutions share in our profits and receive programmatic support on tech transfer and academic startups. OUP is now on its 4th fund, having made over 130 investments in all areas of deep sciences, and many of those companies have had successful exits either through IPOs or mergers and acquisitions. The next slide then shows some of our portfolio companies and the breadth of areas in which we invest in the deep sciences. We're always happy to talk with anyone about our areas of interest. You can also see some of our webinars that we've done on these subjects as well on that YouTube channel that I mentioned before. But now we'll go on to the main content of our webinar. I'll pass it over. Oh, actually, I meant to mention before, I apologize, before I passed off to Otto. We do really enjoy receiving questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A tool on your Zoom account that you have right here to have those questions. Please don't put the questions in the chat. They're harder for me to moderate and then ask our panelists. So please use the Q&A tool in order to ask those questions as we go through the presentation today. All right, now, Otto, I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And let me see if I can actually control up. Here we go. Okay, one back. Here we go. All right. So my goal today, what we're going to talk about is to sort of demystify somewhat the idea of, oh, what do I do about PR? What do I do about communications? It always feels like it's somewhere the 12th thing on a list of top 10 things to do. And my purpose today is to make some of the basics visible so that you are not sort of scared or you don't even know what it's about. And that later when you start even hiring people, you already start doing it, but then maybe you start hiring people to do it as well. You're not only a good sort of user of it, but then you're also a good hirer and manager of it. You know what it can do, you know what the fundamentals are, and so that you come at it with this sense of clarity and visibility, because it's not that hard. And I want to also start with some of the fundamentals in terms of what it can do for you. Often we think about it first when we have that panicked moment of, oh boy, I need to get the word out. Oh boy, I need to get investors. Oh boy, I need to get customers. Oh boy, I need industry partners. Somehow there's a sort of sense of fluttery panic that comes up when you realize that, oh my gosh, I've been working on this thing in my lab for so many years, and now suddenly I need everybody to hear about it. And my purpose today and main message is that if you start thinking about it earlier and you start thinking about it in a systematic way and realizing what it can do for you and what it can't do for you and how it can do it for you, then you'll not only have sort of less concern about when to start and what it can do, but you'll also start thinking about it earlier, and it will actually help your business sort of structurally. And so again, if I could have one key message for today, is that thinking through your communications is a strategic exercise. Thinking about, okay, who do I need? What do I want them to do for me? How am I going to find them? How am I going to convert them? All of that is going to have a direct impact on obviously what you're talking about. It might even have impact on the types of features you're going to end up building out. It might have an impact on when you roll things out, certainly how you do it, which publications you're going to go reach after. So, and a lot of this doesn't have to be the stuff I go through today is not necessarily a 5-day retreat where you have to have big thoughts. For many of these, it's 5 minutes of clarity, followed by maybe an hour or two of getting the rest of the team on board so that you at least are consciously aware of, hey, this is actually the market that we need. This is the next group of people that we need to engage. And this is how we're going to go about engaging them, as opposed to just sort of having that panicked, ready, fire, aim approach when you start thinking that, oh boy, again, we need to make some noise. We need to get that word out. Just to sort of, again, embed this into the sort of process and the phasing of your startup, and you all might be in slightly different places, but it does all start internally. And in fact, with university-based startups, that internal phase might be quite long, right? You might spend a decade working on this, on the research. A lot of it might even happen before you realize there's a business there. You're just solving this really cool problem in the lab, this hard thing that you've been working on. And then as you start getting closer to realizing, hey, there's a real business here, you might spend some time finding the people that you're going to work on it with. You might be refining the idea. You might be realizing, hey, which market should we be going after, et cetera. But there comes a point where you realize that in order to be successful, it now becomes imperative to bring in outside groups to help you co-create the success. It's no longer just dependent on how awesome you are and the work that you're doing. You need to get these outside groups. And again, the 4 standard ones that I'd list there, right? Obviously, the investors, I need the money. Customers, I need someone to buy this thing. Hires, I need to hire people to do it. Partners for many university, right? Especially these sort of deep tech startups, you need the industry partners maybe to launch the pilot project, et cetera. And then broadly, industry also raise awareness of this. So you might be to industry conferences and the like that sort of feed into some of those other groups. And together, the internal work that you've been doing and that external work that you've been doing is what's going to deliver that success. And so I want you to make sure that you start thinking about those external groups. And again, PR and communications obviously is the means to get there. But again, we want to always keep the ends in mind. It's going to make figuring out the means a lot less stressful and a lot less confusing. So as you think through these groups, let's take the customers as an example. The PR and marketing piece is really just the general noise that you're sending out, right? You get the article in the newspaper, you get interviewed on television, whatever it might be. That's what's going to raise the awareness of them. But just because someone says, hey, that startup, that sounds like they're working on something pretty cool, doesn't mean that they are yet sort of convert. Every customer has a funnel, whether we sort of think about it or not, right? But everybody sort of goes from that state of unawareness. And again, PR and marketing is just that initial noise. But then they're going to take several steps before they're going to become a customer. Even for a consumer product, obviously much shorter. For a deep tech product, obviously much longer. But they're going to typically come to the website. Maybe they'll check out they'll Google you. They'll check out some other stuff. They'll like see whether your LinkedIn profile looks impressive. Then maybe they'll reach out and then they're going to, oh, that sounds interesting. Can you send me a case study? Right. So that's the process they go through. And then at some point, hopefully they become a customer. Now, the way to think about it, though, as you build it is that you go kind of you go in the other direction. And so the actual, hey, let me get interviewed for the newspaper is the end of the process in a way of how you think about the communications piece of it, right? The very first thing, and it's starting there on the left of the screen, is like you first have to think about, okay, which market are we going after? And again, that might be obvious. It might not be. Some of you are like, oh, this would be great for the defense application. It's also great for sort of consumer, for the telecom industry or whatever. So you really have to think through what product we have, particularly the beta product that you're probably going to be starting with. Which market should we go after first? Again, seems like a simple question, might have a simple answer, might not. Which segment within that? Who are the deciders within that? Is it the CFO that I'm pitching? Is it the CEO, et cetera? Then also think about, okay, if I decided it's this particular industry, this is where I'm going after. Why would they care? What do they like about it? What's great about it? What's not? Why would they be scared? What are their other options, et cetera? Really sort of think through that. Again, that's going to start crystallizing the messaging that you're going to have and what you're going to talk about. And then obviously you sort of defining what do I think is going to be the average sales funnel? Hey, it's a CFO at K through 12 schools or what have you. And you now need to think like, what steps do they need to go through? Who else do they need to bring on board to make the decisions? And then you can sort of build some of these materials from the bottom up, right? You realize what it is. And then the PR and the marketing part is sort of the culmination of it. Once you get to, you figured out the audience, you figured out what you want to do with them, and then you can figure out the message. And then ultimately you make the noise that starts drawing those people into the site. But if you make that noise first and all you worry about is the PR part, then you're going to they're going to lose them as they go down that funnel. And you're going to have wasted all that precious time that you spent getting the interview or what have you. So I want you to sort of spend some time, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it doesn't have to be an overwrought process. But I want you to at least be conscious of what you're doing and be aware of whether it's working or not and be like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. The message that I send out when I did the interview, then they came to the website, they got a totally different message. They looked at my LinkedIn, which I haven't looked at in 2 years, and it's way out of date, et cetera. Maybe that sent the wrong message. And then you can start thinking about that. And by the way, everybody has a funnel, right? So it's customers, investors, potential hires, all these people do. Again, don't want you to overthink it, but I do want you to think it. And so I want you to think through what pieces they might need in order to make them impressed. Potential hires, for example, you might say like, you know what, my vision is kind of complex and big, not fully represented by my beta product and what I'm talking about on my relatively simple website today. I'm going to write a thought leadership article that is going to explain the big vision, and I can put it up on LinkedIn or Medium or what have you. And the purpose is not to get a lot of people to read it, but to get the right people to read it. So that might be an important piece of helping to explain where you're going. And so that when you have that conversation with someone at the conference that you think would be great for a role with you, and they start to do some research on it, they can have something that they can process and be like, yeah, they are really working on a hard problem. If this works, it's going to have a big impact. Right? It's going to give them the tools that they need to convince themselves. So another, and again, Kirsten, if there's any questions that pop up or something, I'm happy to jump in them.
For now, we're good.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so another important question that often comes up in the sort of what story I tell, and I know Lori's going to talk more a little about the storytelling component of this, is this idea of which stories do I have multiple stories. I have the sort of story about my product today. I have the story about the earth, how I'm going to change the world. There's all these different people. Who do I tell what story to and when? And I'm just going to sort of quick summary of that. So investors, you generally are going to talk about the big picture, right? They want to know about how you have $1 billion idea. So you absolutely have to focus on this idea of like, wow, I understand how we're going to revolutionize plastic recycling, and the problem is so massive, and this is how we're going to have that impact. So they want to hear that story. They also want to hear about, yes, and we have a pilot project today with this one recycling facility, and we're already doing whatever it is, 1,000 pounds a month or something. It might be very limited, but the investors can be very impressed with the fact that, hey, you've already done it. You've made a deal. You have a pilot going. Apparently the technology works, et cetera. And then they can extrapolate from there to that big picture. The middle part of it, hey, and then we're going to have a business that's worth, $5 million, is sort of something you can sort of somewhat soft pedal. For the employees, you need to keep them focused on making sure that 1,000-pound plastic recycling project that you're doing right now, that works. Because if that one fails, you're never going to get to the big picture. Sure, they need to know the big picture, because that's why their stock options are going to be worth so much. And you want to make sure that they sort of know where the North Star is. But you really need to keep them focused on today, because otherwise tomorrow ain't going to happen. For the industry, on the other hand, when you have the conference speech, right, that's where you just let it all hang out. This is where, oh my gosh, again, plastic, it's massive problem, X gigatons of it each year, and we're going to solve all that problem. And the fact that you're doing some small stuff isn't that important. And then finally, for customers, right there, you're just selling the product that you have today. And I don't want you talking about within limits, but like the big picture. Again, I always think of when Steve Jobs was selling the iPhone 1, he wasn't talking about the iPhone 2 and how great it was going to be in 12 months. He was saying, here's this thing, it puts 1,000 songs in your pocket. Isn't it incredible? Buy one today. Back of his mind, he knew exactly that next year he was going to be talking about 10,000 songs in your pocket, but he didn't want to talk about that, because all that was going to get you to do is to wait a year to buy the next great thing. I often find this is a really big problem with a network effect business, right? Where when everybody's using this thing, it's going to be incredible. But the point is, for the first customer, it's not incredible because there's not yet a big network. So you have to find another benefit that they're going to have so that they have a good reason to buy it today. And they're not like, well, great, I'll buy it when everyone else has bought it, because then you're never going to get that first customer. So I really want to keep you, when you're speaking with individual customers, keep them focused. Okay, and then so another question I get a lot, which is, okay, well, who should be going out and doing all that PR stuff? And the bottom line is, I sort of illustrated it here in these triangles, right, is that it's going to start with you, because you're the person who has the most passion, commitment, and it's knowledge. They're the people that you're going to want to have quoted in the end anyways. On the other hand, it also is going to take the most of your time, right? So that's obviously a bummer. And you already have a list this long of things that you need to do. So while it's going to start with you, I want you to also already be thinking about how you're going to slowly start passing that off, right? And this first step out is an employee or consultant, right? Someone like Lori or myself, right? Someone who might start taking some of that work on and saying, hey, I can help you out, right? Obviously, it's no longer the founder, but it also is going to take less of your time. And then as you slowly get larger and bigger, at some point, you're going to be thinking about PR agencies. They are, generally speaking, right, they're very sort of month and long-term contract oriented. You're one of many clients for them. They obviously have scale. They're going to cost a lot. And at some point, you're going to get there. But I don't want you thinking about that too early, so that you don't have time and that you don't get the message right initially. Okay, so now I want to spend a few minutes talking about you've made sure you have a message. And again, Lori's going to talk a little bit about some of that foundational storytelling, but you're going to have that message. You're like, okay, I've put it on my website. I've built a sort of publicly visible set of documents and materials that potential customers or partners can find. And I'm ready to start getting that word out and putting it out into the marketplace and building that noise, because I know that I've thought through my funnel so that when they come through, there's going to be a high percentage likelihood that they're going to actually, again, convert, buy the product, get hired, or whatever it is. So I have about 7 rules here, and these are not in any huge order, but they're all important. The first is, I want you to think about journalists as individual people and not as like, oh, we got this list of 500 names and we're going to just blast it out there and spray and pray and all that. If you spend time on PR. And again, since it's on you in those first minutes, I want you to spend the time to sort of think it through. You're going to be better off having personal relationships with 2 or 3 meaningful journalists that are relevant to your field, rather than having a list of 500 versus 300 names in a spreadsheet somewhere that you're going to blast stuff out to. If you think of them as individuals who are again, they don't inherently care about you, but they do, because this is why you pick them, they have an inherent care about the industry that you're in. And so you need to figure out what their particular angle on it is. Everybody has an angle. And I want you to spend the time to think through how you're going to reach them. I want you to read some of those articles that they've written. I want you to spend time maybe reaching out to them. Maybe you can help them. Again, how do relationships get started? The same way they do everywhere else in the world, right? Maybe you reach out to them, you compliment them on something they wrote. You say, oh, I saw this thing. It made me think of this. Have you ever considered speaking to so-and-so? Maybe you can help them out. And again, nothing self-serving yet. Obviously ulterior motive maybe, but here's this great expert I could introduce you to. Have you heard of this other company? Again, start up a friendship, start up some kind of a relationship, and you're going to be way ahead when it comes time to spend to get them to do something for you. Journalists, just like, a relationship, just like everyone else. Once you sort of have that, I also want you to realize that what the job of a journalist is, and that is they wake up in the morning, they want to impress their boss, they want to get they want to have a lot of views and reads and clicks on the articles that they write. They'd like to be done by 6 so they can go home and have dinner with the family, right? They want all the things that everybody else wants. And so if you think about and make the world from their perspective and from their particular point of reference, and you make it easy to them when you pitch them, and I'm going to give you a couple of ideas of how to pitch it so that they have to do less work about going from seeing your email to imagining what the finished article would be, the better off you'll be, right? If you just say, hey, I have this company and it's so awesome and you should write about it, like at first they might not really think about it because they have to, well, what is great about it, or how does that really impact, or what's the trend that's illustrating, what's the larger story here. So the more you can pre-package it for them in a way that they like, and again, if you have a small group, it's easier to spend the time to think that through, the more likely is you're going to give that you're going to have a positive result, right? Pre-digesting it for them is going to be a very sort of a powerful tool. My next thing is we all think about the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, right? Bloomberg. I want you to think through, and those are great. Like those top tier publications are awesome. Obviously, mom is impressed when you're in the New York Times. Like I get that, but I want you to think about what are the places where your actual customer, again, if you've done the research and you've thought through, and again, for some of these, particularly science startups, like the audience that you're trying to reach is, 100 people, 1,000 people. Where do they actually spend their time? Sure, they read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but they also read some really niche publication that's in your industry. In fact, that's probably where they're going to be spending more time thinking about it from I'm on, with their work hat on, as opposed to their sort of I'm relaxing time. And it's easier to get into those publications generally. And that's where the people are thinking, that's where your audience is going, thinking about work to begin with. And it's much easier to get in there. So oftentimes, Lawn and Garden Monthly Magazine might be a lot more effective for you to get into than the New York Times. And sure, again, I'm not saying New York Times isn't great, but the amount of time, resources, effort, and hair pulling out that it's going to take to get into the New York Times, you could have gotten into 5 publications that were targeted at your area. So again, you want to think about results. You don't get points for being in the New York Times, right? Like all of this PR and communications is the means to an end of getting your startup to be successful. And so you want to pick the shortest and path of least resistance between the A and B. And oftentimes it's those small niche publications. It might be a newsletter. It might be a blog that's being done, right? Like that's where your 100 people are. That's where you should go. Another thing to think about is again, nobody cares about your business yet. They care about a lot of other things. So if there's something happening in the outside world that you can yoke yourself to, use that, right? If there's, hey, again, for whatever reason, the plastic example, the plastic gyre is in the news, maybe for some particular reason. A boat sank because it ran into the plastic gyre, and suddenly it's in the news, right? Suddenly there's an opportunity for you to talk about, hey, and there's this problem. Good thing is there's a solution. It won't be an article about you, but you will get mentioned, and you'll be mentioned in the environment in which you want to be mentioned, right? In discussing the particular problem that you help solve. So always be alert for stuff that's already happening, that where you can turn the power of that interest in those things to your own advantage. Two more trends of three. First of all, everything happens in threes. If you want to be a trend, you're a trend that's reforming cancer treatment, right? Maybe there's two other things that are happening, not direct competitors, but other things that are happening around that area. There's the trend of carbon capture, and there's three different ways that people are doing it, or the way they're approaching the problem. You're obviously one of the examples. But if you hand the journalist, this is you thinking like a journalist, you hand them something that's in a trend of three. Oh, great, it's a trend. You illustrate it, boom. Again, it's not just an article about you. It's not just sort of this hagiographical thing, which again, no journalist really is going to write. They're going to write about the big issue. Again, it's in a way using the larger issue to your advantage, and you illustrate that trends always come in three. And then finally, if your startup creates data, data is awesome. Data is powerful. If you have something that illustrates, especially if it's counterintuitive, that illustrates something that's happening in the world, then use data to illustrate it. You've done this research on finance, and you've illustrated the depth to which the growth or fall of credit in the United States, and your data shows something really interesting about that. That's amazing. And if you gather data on an ongoing basis, and so now you can have an index, right? So now every month, every 6 months, every year, you can update it to illustrate how the world is changing. Journalists love data. The world loves data. If you've got this kind of data, think about how it might be able to illustrate something. The National Association of Realtors makes hay every single month when in every state and city in the country, they can, the Arizona real estate market is up 0.2%, down 0.2%, et cetera. Everyone who's writing about real estate is going to quote that, mention the National Association of Realtors. So if you can be that, do it. That's it. So I have this Core Communications, my consulting group, and I also, and I'm going to hand this back to, I have to hand back, oh, you took it back. I also have an awards program for great startup storytelling. I'm also on the Better World Project Committee at Autumn, of which many of you are probably members. So, and I'm going to be reaching out and telling more about the Better World Project. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let me hand it over to Lori.
And I'm going to just really quickly, Otto, before we move to Lori. So first of all, thank you so much for working on that Better World Project for Autumn. That's terrific. It's for those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically highlights of technologies that are coming out of universities that impact the world. So thank you so much for doing that. I do have one question before we move on to Lori, which was, you talked about on the previous slide about, basically kind of following the news and saying, knowing like this is actually an area of the news that, our startup potentially is impacting. How do you, how can academics kind of be working perhaps with the PR people at their university also on this? Have you seen that happen as well, where they get to know some of the people who are working on communications and marketing at their universities, and them following certain things and then being able to provide commentary and therefore kind of getting known because of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great point. Thank you. The idea that the communications team at the university is in many ways it's like an outside agency. If you think about it in those terms, there are already people that are paid to think about promoting the university. Obviously, you as an example of being one of the sort of awesome elements of what's happening at that university, you are a great resource to them. You are helping them do their job. So in a way, it's a perfect training ground to not only think about how you're presenting yourself in a way that the communications team there is going to help promote to the outside world and to do their job easier and better, but it's also obviously a great way to have them and to speak with them, and they can obviously help you. They're trained and experienced at this. They've seen this before. They can help you refine your message and go through a lot of it. So it's a great opportunity to learn about this business, but obviously also to promote yourself. So I highly encourage you to
get to know your communications team at your academic institution. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean it's great. I mean, typically it's also free to you, right? It's the perfect opportunity for you to and way for you to get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Otto. Lori, we'll move on to you, and I think Katie will move the slides forward for you.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Otto. It's nice to run into and work with and talk with a fellow journalist because, I was telling you yesterday, like journalists are people too is one of my favorite lines because it's very true. So I'm excited to kind of build off of and cover some different pieces of what Otto had kind of discussed. My specialty is definitely messaging and storytelling. These are my favorite things to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to kind of going over some of the things with you. So Katie, please, next slide. Like I said earlier, I'm Lori Lennon, founder and CEO of Thinkubator Media. We're an organization that elevates the profiles of women in STEM. Our website and my email is here. So if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking over this webinar, feel free to send me an email and we can either set up a time to chat or just have a conversation over email. What I have found with these webinars and workshops is that a lot of times the content we cover sparks ideas and gets people thinking about topics that they haven't really thought about before, but may not be comfortable kind of asking the more specific questions in a larger setting like this. Next slide, please. So my goal is by the end of this session, you'll have a basic framework of how to build a message around your research or company. You'll have a foundational understanding of how to use storytelling to build your business and how to leverage messaging and storytelling for PR opportunities and for content online. So next slide, please. So I like to start off with the problem because communication is such a key piece, but as Otto had mentioned, a lot of times it's not like a top priority for companies, and it's not for a lack of caring, it's for a lack of capacity. And, a lot of times when we start engaging with companies, they're, either spinning out post Series A, and things that they're focused on are infrastructure, scientific staff, and building those parts of their team. And so sometimes it's challenging to bring in and have like your own personal communications team. So that's where we kind of step in. This company and this research is your baby. Like, and love this work inside and out. A lot of times you've been spending decades on this work. So what we have found is that sometimes being able to pull back and talk about your work in a way that's more overarching and kind of resonates with the general public can be a little challenging. So that's where this messaging work can be really helpful. Complex messages and complex science are really tough to simplify, and not only because it's a lot of industry and research jargon. There's also this very understandable fear that simplifying the research can also misconstrue the science. So that's where we like to work a lot with folks, because it is kind of like a challenge, because you want to make sure folks can understand what you're talking about, but you also want to make sure what folks are saying about you is the actual research that you're doing, right? So we'll kind of tackle that a little bit today. Storytelling is super impactful, but it can sometimes be hard to build that story. So we'll kind of go through some strategies to do that. And then bringing these skills together can be overwhelming. You're going to learn how to do messaging. You're going to learn how to do storytelling. We're going to figure out where to talk about this stuff, and bringing it all together does take a little bit of practice, but we can all do it. So we'll do it together. So we're going to go to the next slide, please. All right. I'm going to spend 30 seconds on this slide, maybe 40, but before we get to the messaging, there's a couple of key pieces. Otto touched on them a little bit, but if you're really going to create a story, a message and a story that resonates, you need to start identifying what your goals are and who your audience is. And what I'm going to do, and I think Katie has the link, we're going to share a communications toolkit that'll help kind of go through, that'll kind of go through how to identify that audience, how to think about your goals, and kind of get that work done so that when we start building the message, it'll be easier to understand who you're talking to. Because, this can change over time as your company grows and changes, as the goals and priorities of your company change. Sometimes the goals are, hiring staff, right? So if you're hiring staff, your goal isn't to, I don't know, create a message to be in, like Otto said, the New York Times. You might want to hit like industry and trade journals. And so like just understanding what your goals are and who you need to talk to are important first when you start your messaging. So next slide, please. Great, thank you. So like I said, no one is invested in your research, as invested in your research as you are, right? So this is, it becomes a challenge because you're like, okay, well, how am I going to talk about my work? So what we love to do with folks too is create like a team group think when it comes to this stuff, right? So what we want you to do is, start thinking about like, who is your audience and who you want to talk to, and then what's the language you use, and then test and refine. Create messages, say like, I think this is the message that will resonate based on who we need to talk to, and make sure that you're talking to folks who are not only just in the industry, but also other folks who are, I don't know, like family and friends. The amount of conversations we have with people who are like, I don't talk about my research at Thanksgiving because no one understands what I'm doing. Like that is the perfect time to practice talking about your research. So that's what we really want to get people to do. And you want to practice your message with this audience in mind, right? Because you don't want to have the first time you're talking about this message and sharing your work in front of the people that you need to invest in you. So you want to make sure you're really comfortable and you're able to kind of like pivot and move around and be a little bit flexible with the message. So just knowing it inside and out can be really helpful. And the best piece of advice I've ever gotten from a friend when I was doing this really big talk and I was feeling very nervous about it, I kept forgetting all of these pieces. And my friend who was coaching me had said, listen, if you can't remember it, you don't care about it enough. So don't say it, say something else. So I feel like that's a really good piece to remember when you're thinking about messaging. And just remember the message is totally going to change over time. So as you grow, as your priorities change, as more team members become involved, like it's a living and breathing piece of your company. So just know that whatever you're doing isn't set in stone, and it gets easier each time you do it. So just give yourself a little grace. That's what I always encourage people to do. Next slide, please.
I'm gonna pop in right here just to try to pound in on one of your points, which is the practicing. Practice.
Yes.
It feels weird sometimes. And I know like, people in general, they hear this, et cetera. It feels weird to say something over and over and over again, but it really does help you just be far more fluid in your message the more you practice it. And sometimes just practice it in front of people that, who maybe don't even care so much about what it is that you're going to talk about, but just having a small audience in front of you may just, help you, say, okay, these now I have identified what the important parts are by just saying it out loud to other people in front of me. So I'll just wanted to.
Yeah, exactly, Kirsten, exactly right. And sometimes I practice stuff in front of my dog. She loves it every time. She gives me positive affirmations every time I finish. But what happens is the more you practice, the more brain space you have to add stories to it, add pieces, relevant pieces of information, news articles, whatever, because you have that message on lock. So yeah, practice for sure. Right, next slide, please. So like I say, we talk about this with everybody. The most annoying questions and statements I always make when I'm working with clients is, what is your goal? Is always the first question you should be asking before you do anything big or, start building everything. But also like, don't ever do something alone. Like if you don't want to, you don't have to. You have teams of people within your company, within your networks, or your family. They are great people to kind of lean on when you're starting to think about what you want to share. When you start sharing a message, for example, like say you've built this message and you start sharing with folks, they will give you clues as to how to make your message better, even if they don't know it. They're going to ask you whys, they're going to ask you what's, and those are all these pieces of information that will help you understand what's lacking in your message and what's missing. Because what the goal is that your message will be strong enough that folks are going to start asking the right questions and the questions that you want them to ask once you finish your like elevator pitch, for example, right? So listening to those whys and whats and fine tuning that statement will really help folks to be like, how can I work with you afterwards? Or, I have a research collaborator who's doing something very similar. You guys should probably meet because, you're doing a lot of the same things. So just practice the whys and whats, and think about why people should care, right? And a lot of times people hate when I ask this question, but you care about this work because it is what you live and breathe all the time. And it's your job through this messaging work and what we'll go through next, storytelling, is to get people to care with you, right? So, sometimes the research that we're all talking about is really complicated and complex. Sometimes it's the first step in 10 steps to get to, say, like a therapeutic. But you need to start to understand and be able to communicate why this piece is super important and make it relatable for others to be super invested in you. And you want to make sure you have a call to action. Understanding your audience is really helpful for that. So say you're like doing fundraising and you're looking to build a team, your call to action could be, here's my message. I'm looking for folks who are open to collaborating with me, or I'm looking to meet investors who are interested in investing in this space, right? So you want to make sure you have a really clear call to action when you do start networking with people. And like I said, your message and your call to action will always change over time. Okay, next slide, please. Storytelling is a great piece of this. We're bombarded with a ton of information. I think Otto can definitely relate in the newsroom. You get hundreds of random emails every single day, press releases, reach outs. So, in a time when we're just consumed by so much information, this storytelling piece can be really important. It's when you're watching like a politician speak, an activist, or a high-level speaker, you will always see them tie stories, anecdotes, and pieces to their speeches, right? Because those are the message is really important, and the story is what builds connection, right? So, for example, I used to work at Northeastern, and I'm a Northeastern alum. Whenever I do outreach to folks, I don't know them. The only thing I know about them is that they went to Northeastern. I will email them and say, I'm a fellow Husky. 90% of the time, I will get a response back, right? So, being able to kind of make those identifications and links is really important. People really care about that, and people are more invested when they have that connection with you. So it has a lot of really great, it has an opportunity to get your foot in the door, and also to, when you're thinking about you are networking and you have that story, if you're playing the game of telephone and say, I need to talk about your research, 3 people down, if there's a story, it'll stick more, and I'll be able to share your message. Like the accuracy of your message has a higher likelihood of sticking. And this piece here, I bolded very intentionally. Every story is a great story. Do not compare your story to others. The amount of times I've heard, I don't have the rags to riches story. I haven't risen from adversity. I'm not that phoenix who's risen from the ashes. Like, none of that matters. Your story is interesting because it's yours. And if you can't figure out how interesting your story is, you don't have to do it alone. One of the things that we always encourage folks to do is have somebody who loves and cares about you interview you, do a big brain dump, talk about all the things that you've done in your life. And I got to be honest, you will see this person will be like, that's amazing. You should talk about that. And you don't know that that is amazing to other people because it's just something that you've done in your life. So, don't always just try to do it on your own, because, when I was building my bio, for example, I was like, yeah, I worked in TV, and then I worked at Northeastern to have my own company. And, when I walked through the work that I've done myself with a friend of mine, that's the experience I had too, where it was like, don't forget to talk about this. Don't forget to talk about this. So always just remember, your story is great because it's yours. And if you can't figure out how to tell it, find someone to help you. Okay, next slide. Okay, like I said, and then also like test and refine. This is what happens every time. Work with your friend or family member or close colleague to help kind of figure out what you want to talk about in your story. But then also, this is the same thing that we talked about with messaging, right? So if you're telling your story to somebody and they go, well, what about that? Or, what happened between here and here? Like those pieces will help you refine your story so that it's clear and cohesive. Your message really blends well with it, and then you're getting folks to ask the right questions after you're finished. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so sharing your story and message, it's not just going to happen over elevator pitches and networking. There's a million ways that you can use this information and this content once it's ready. Website content, pitch decks, social media, and I would also add blogs here, because I mean, how many times have you woken up on Monday to say, oh my God, I need to write a story for my website. I don't know what to write about. But if you have a message, you have clear pathways and clear goals that you want to achieve with your company, and those can be your guideposts, right? So so you can say, this is the message I've created. What is the content that I can write that'll help kind of double down on that message, right? So that it just kind of helps create a roadmap for you where there wasn't one before. Networking is a great place to do this. Elevator pitches, it's really endless in terms of, once you have a message, you have a goal and you have a start line. So these are all the pieces where all that work can be highlighted. All right, next please. This is a best case scenario timeline. So I know folks, I've gotten requests for help for social media like 2 weeks before a launch, which is okay too, because folks are really busy and time is time is so precious. But if you're working, and this timeline really kind of focuses around like teamwork as well, like if you have multiple stakeholders that you're engaging with, I would give yourself 6 months of time just to be able to identify your mission, vision, value, goals, identify your audience, create that message that's really going to stick, find your story, kind of practice that all together, and then start implementing it, right? But obviously, if you're a solopreneur, if you're still doing this research on your own, this timeline can definitely be cut down a lot. But one thing that I would love, and I try to encourage folks to avoid, is to start thinking about this like 1 month before a big launch, right? You want to make sure that you're practiced, you've got your message down, you've got your website content, you've got a content plan all set to go in a time that's not going to make you want to pull your hair out. Okay, next slide, please. So now this is kind of to dovetail of what Otto was talking about earlier, preparing for an interview. We like to talk about this because you have your message and you have your goals, right? And you have your audience. So it may not be, as Otto had mentioned, the New York Times or the Washington Post all the time. It could be like Nature or an engineering journal, right? So the way that we like to help folks prepare for an interview, and you'll also, we'll share a link for a talking points worksheet that could be really helpful for moments like this. You want to come in with a plan, right? You want to make sure that you're not going in there just being like, I'm just going to hope for the best and see how it goes. Like, you want to make sure that you have a plan, because, the journalists are people too, and they're coming to you because you're an expert in the space, right? And so they want to hear your insights and your information and to understand your topic better. So this is you controlling the narrative. So what you want to do is come up with 3 must discuss points and topics that you want to talk about during this interview, right? So is it a launch? Is it a new discovery in your research space? Like, you want to be able to identify the goal before you get to the interview, right? Because if anybody, there's tons of videos online about this, but pivoting is a really great asset to have for someone who's doing an interview, because that helps you answer questions in the way that you want, right? So, for example, I was doing some work and someone was like, what are you other? They were like, what are you other than a mother? So, which is an incredibly insulting question. But what I was able to do is pivot and say, well, I am a mom, so I care about all of these things, and this is the stuff that we're working on right now. So instead of saying, that's an inappropriate question, why did you ask me that question? I was able to pivot into one of the must discuss topics that I had mentioned for myself, or had noted for myself before I started this discussion. And you also want to think about the controversial, tough questions, the stuff that's still not able to be discussed, right? Because even though these questions may not be asked at all. There is something that happens to your soul when you feel like you're prepared to answer questions that make you incredibly uncomfortable. So just kind of, it gives you space to just really think about the interview and be prepared for it in the way you want. And then you'll have these answers to these questions if they ever arise, right? And then I did jump ahead just a little bit, but like the pivots are great ways to answer controversial, tough questions and also kind of bring folks back to the point that you want to talk about. Okay, next slide.
But before the next slide, actually, Lori, there's a couple of questions. One is actually about, I think, kind of these pivots and reframing the question. Can you talk about how interview subjects can say, you asked me this, but I think the real question that you're getting at is, da, 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 da. Talk about how people can incorporate this.
Yeah, so say, for example, say you're asked a question that isn't really, that you really aren't ready to answer or don't want to answer. Like sometimes we've worked with folks to be like, it's really important to understand that question. But before we can even talk about that, we need to better understand this. And then you can talk about your work there. You know what I mean? Because you can control the narrative in that way, right? So you can kind of like address, this is now, we spend good amounts of time with folks on really practicing pivots, but what you can do is like lightly address the question and then kind of create that little bridge where you can then talk about the things that you want to talk about, right? So one of my favorite videos is Dr. Anthony Fauci, Tony Fauci, talking about I think it was like Ebola or something, and the reporter had asked a more sensational question rather than something that truly addressed some of the things that he was on the talk show to discuss around like contractibility and all that kind of stuff. So he was able to be like, well, yeah, he's asking these questions, but we really need to understand the transmissibility or how this is all transmitted, and here are the ways, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of like lightly addressing it and moving on.
Yeah. Okay.
That also takes practice. Like pivoting is hard, so it does take practice too.
Yeah. The other question actually wasn't about interviews, but it's about blogs. How do blogs factor into thought leadership, and any advice for best practices on those? And Lori, I'll ask you this first, and Otto, if you can also answer that. So Lori first.
Yeah, for sure. So when folks say that they want to start blogs, the one thing I always ask is, what is the possibility of this being sustained? Because a lot of times blogs can stay consistent for like 2 to 3 months, and then things get really busy and they kind of fall off. So what we try to ask is, do you have, like, what's your strategy for blogs? Is this something you're going to do? Do you have other folks on your team who could be a part of this? What content already exists online that you can provide feedback and comments on, as like a blog post? Because the one issue that we always run into is the sustainability of blog posts. The reason why blogs are really great is because they make what would be a static website not static, which is always great for like SEO. It's great for, rising up on the search results, right? So that is a good reason why blogs are really important. But it's not going to help if you're not doing blogs. Sometimes we have worked with folks who've created like thought leadership pieces that have not been accepted by media outlets, or it hasn't landed anywhere, and it's a great place to kind of like keep that content so it doesn't just go somewhere to die alone. It has a place to exist, and it can be repurposed in multiple ways by the company itself. So there's a lot of really great ways to utilize blogs, but the first and foremost, the sustainability of it needs to be discussed.
Great, thanks, Otto. Anything you want to add to that on blogs?
I first of all, I want to echo the sustainability side of it. That is absolutely the primary problem. Is it's you get on a treadmill, and it's going to be, you're going to want to jump off. Chances are, if you haven't really thought through the purpose of it, and which is probably my second point, is that you have to really think through: is it, in my case, really important that I have this blog that is ongoing? Do I need to be up in the search result? Is this the type of subject? Is my customer funnel Are they Googling something like, how do I solve this? And then they find you. Is that really how they're finding it? If that is, right, if that becomes a central pillar of your strategy, like, yeah, that is, I need to have all this content out there because people are searching for things related to my field and my product or service, and they need to find it, then then that might be a part of your strategy. And that's going to keep you, even when the going gets tough, you're going to remember, oh yeah, I need to invest in all of this blog content because that's what's going to rise up in the search results. And that's what's going to drive the results. My final point is around dates. Again, if you're even just putting out the occasional article, which by the way is a great thing, maybe you just need one or two pieces or just the occasional stuff, is when they typically are published in whatever platform it is. It'll have the date of the publishing, or you might even add it. Is that it looks great, obviously, on day one when you publish it, but then you go off and you do something else and you come back 9 months later and you start looking at it, and suddenly all of the dates are 9, 12, 18 months out, and suddenly everyone sees it and the message that's sent is, oh God, is this business even still around? So be careful of those dates. You can easily, might just go in and refresh them every once in a while or remove them. Just be aware that that date thing and the sort of freshness of your site can be compromised if your attention gets drawn elsewhere.
Really good point. All right, Lori, sorry, continue on. We just have a few minutes left.
No, that's fine. I just go to the next slide. Yeah, this is really quick. So communicating your science takes practice. So, sharing your work effectively beyond your peers is essential, right? For the public understand the importance of investing in work like yours and understanding the importance of science. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love science communication, is it's making science accessible to folks who might not have access to it otherwise. And also, potential investors and folks who can make a difference in this space who aren't in the disciplines. So just, make sure you practice and take your time and work with people close to you. And it's just, you'll see really big impacts by doing this work. It's hard sometimes, right? But, once it's done, you'll start seeing the impacts pretty quickly.
Terrific. Thank you. Katie, we'll go to the last slide. This is the contact information for myself and our experts today. Thank you, Lori and Otto, so much for joining. I have one final question for each of you, and I'm not going to have you answer it yet, but I'm going to give you the question. The question is, what are the 3 top things you want people to take away from this webinar today that hopefully they can start using and thinking about, in the very near future? And while you are thinking about what those top 2 or 3 things are, I do want to mention to everyone who's been joining us today, there is a survey that comes up as you leave this webinar. It's also in the chat right now. Please do answer this survey. We do look at all the results, and it actually helps inform us about our future webinars, how we run them, and also the content of them. So with that, before we sign off in the next minute and a half, your top 3 things you'd like people to take away. I'll start with you, Lori.
Okay, top 3 things I would say: definitely start thinking about your message and who you need to share with. Definitely know that all of this stuff is flexible and will change over time, and just practice.
Great. Thank you. Otto.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I find also working from the bottom up. So think about your audience and your business goals first and work backwards from there. That's super important. Whenever I work with clients, they sort of almost want to start at the end, and the goal is to draw them back to make sure that they're talking about their business goals first. And then we figure out, okay, so then who's the audience, and then what do we need them to do? And then let's get to that message. Once you get to that message, I want consistency across all of your different platforms. So make sure that your LinkedIn is up to date. If you have a social media, if you have your website, whatever thing, Medium, whatever you have out there, I want it singing off the same song sheet. And then obviously once you have all that, then obviously you need to refine that message and make sure that that message is the same, is consistent, is telling a great story.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Lori, for joining us today and providing your expertise. Really appreciate it. Thank you to our audience for joining us as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. And we look forward to hearing more about this area, is because obviously it's something that's touching all of us these days, the different ways that we're hearing about things and learning about the terrific science that is coming out of institutions and the startups associated with them. Thank you again.